If you're looking to add contrast to your photos or your Photoshop documents, I've got 3 different ways for you. I've used each of these different adjustment layers from time to time, and you might just find one that best suits your needs. Let's open up Photoshop and get started. So we've got a portrait photograph that I downloaded from unsplash.com. Now what we're going to do is add adjustment layers in order to add contrast. This is a non-destructive way of editing your imagery. So we've got the layer down here that is just the photo layer that we opened in Photoshop. If we open up our adjustments tab, and if you don't see that, you can go up to Window, down to Adjustments. We have lots of different adjustment layers that we can add. You'll notice the first one is brightness and contrast. Let's go ahead and click on that. It creates a new adjustment layer, and that adjustment layer is brightness and contrast. And in the properties panel that it pops up, you'll see that you can make adjustments to brightness and contrast. Quite simply put, this is the easiest, quickest way to just pump a little bit of contrast into your image. You can turn on and off or hide this layer by clicking the eyeball icon to see what your adjustments were. Now, it's the easiest to make that contrast adjustment, but it's also probably the most limiting. So let's take a look at 2 other ways that we can adjust contrast and maybe have a little bit more control over our image. We go back to adjustments and we have another one here somewhere called levels. Oh, it's right next to it. Perfect. Levels, if we click on that, it's going to do the same thing, open up a levels adjustment layer. Now we have this little box in our properties panel here where we can make adjustments with these tabs. And essentially what you have is sort of like a histogram here, and then below it, I would call this the output levels, or you might think of it as clipping a little bit. We'll start with the output levels. This is essentially saying what is my darkest dark and what is my lightest light. So I can move this slider off of the black, and now I'm basically telling this histogram up here, the darkest dark should be more of a grayish color. The lightest light should be not bright white, but maybe more, into the grays, into the midtones. Obviously, if we're adding contrast, we want the darkest dark to be black and the whitest white to be pure white. Up here is where we really can start to add that contrast. Essentially what this is doing is saying anything before this tab, clip to black. Anything above this one, clip to white. And so by doing that, we can bring more of our highlights into our image and more of our darkest shadows into our image. And then we have a midtone slider here that we can also make adjustments to. And that's going to brighten or darken the midtones in our image. So we have a little bit more control there, adding contrast. And now we can see by hiding this layer again what we've done to our image. And this is a little bit different than just that contrast slider, and you can get some more effects out of it. Okay, for the third and final way to add contrast to your image, we're going to open up the curves panel. Now the curves panel, and this is another adjustment layer, so the curves adjustment layer. This thing always used to scare me, but I actually have grown to understand it more now. I'm going to teach it to you real quick here, maybe in a minute. All right, so we have that same idea where we have an input and an output. Essentially, this first point here, you can see this graph, right? We have like an X and a Y graph here. It goes from black to white and black to white. This is like an input output. It's basically saying, okay, anything that's black, turn it to gray. Anything that's white, let's bring it more down into the gray, right? Let's make it a little bit darker. So with that idea in mind, what we can do is start to grab different parts and add points to this. We can brighten up some of those upper midtones. We can darken some of the others. We want that blackest black to stay there. We can actually bring it horizontal to clip it more. So we can get more of our midtones actually turning into that darkest dark. We can do the same up here. We can say the highlights, there should be more of them clipping off to the brightest white. And as we begin to make those adjustments with the curves, you can see we're pumping more of that contrast in. And we can make sort of spot adjustments. I can keep adding points to this and say, well, I want to see a little bit more of the midtones. I want those to be brighter. Maybe some of the upper ones a little bit darker. And while we are kind of morphing our image a little bit, you do have to be kind of careful not to maybe blow out the image or adjust, the colors too much. It might get a little bit oversaturated. Once you start playing with this, you can really, really control that contrast level in your image. All right, I think that was pretty quick. I hope so. I was trying to do it in like 3 minutes, like three layer adjustments in 3 minutes. But who knows? If that helped you, there's 3 ways to add contrast to your images in Adobe Photoshop. I'm Spencer from Pixel and Bracket, and I'll see you next time.